Quarterback is the most difficult position to play in sports. But how difficult is it to find a quarterback for your fantasy team? Well, you're about to find out because our fantasy quarterback preview is coming up next.
It's about that time.
Stone on Sports.
How's it going, everybody? You are tuned in to Stoned On Sports Fantasy Baseball. My name is Matt. You can find me over on X at Pick His Ass Up. Got the awesome co-host Kyle here with me today. And like I said, we are talking quarterbacks. And quarterback draft strategy, it seems like something that really varies widely from player to player, right? Kyle, what's your strategy when you go to look to draft a quarterback?
Yeah, I'm always a late rounder, so I'm usually not even considering it until, around 9 or something, probably like that. Sometimes maybe 8, but usually around 10, 9 or 10. And I want to get them skill possession players. I want to get as many as I can. And I think a lot of times you can get a quarterback that low that, can easily provide, 80 to 90% of the production of somebody that might go 4 rounds earlier.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yep, for sure. So we're going to get started. Our first quarterback we're going to talk today, there is no mistaking this Buffalo Bills QB. He has finished as the top 2 QB or better in fantasy every year since 2020. Matt, will Josh Allen finish in the top 2 again this year?
That is a very good question. And my answer is we'll see.
Sure.
He was the number 1 quarterback last season in both total points and points per game, according to Fantasy Pros. And like you said, he's been up there, over the past few seasons as well. He was within 5 points of his 24.2 point per game average 10 times over the season. And he went well over that average 3 times with games of 36.5, 30, and 40.7 points. You absolutely love to see a blow up like that. He scored fewer than 20 points 4 times, but he didn't score fewer than 10 in any of his games, which is fantastic. And how did he get there? Well, he completed 385 out of 579 passes. That gave him 4,306 yards passing, threw 29 touchdowns, 18 interceptions. And we know that turnovers have been a problem with this dude over the past couple seasons. He also chipped in 524 yards on the ground and 15 touchdowns. Holy smokes, that's a lot of rushing TDs for a quarterback. He's currently being drafted as the number 1 QB off the board with an ADP of roughly 30. The team brought in Ray Davis this offseason, drafted him out of Kentucky, and I think he's going to handle a good amount of the between the tackles work and short yardage work. And you combine that with them also drafting a big-bodied receiver in Keon Coleman and the emergence of Dalton Kincaid. I don't see that 15 rushing touchdowns being repeatable. It's definitely his outlier season. We're also seeing him be much less efficient with his running. His 4.7 yards per carry last season was his worst since 2020. His rushing total was also significantly down after posting seasons of 763 and 762 yards the past couple of years. He had 328 fewer yards rushing last season compared to 2022, despite just having 13 fewer carries. He's also having fewer designed rush attempts called for him. He's down about 7 points over the past couple seasons in that regard. And you really have to wonder if defenses have found an effective way to spy on him and limit what he can do. He still is rushing for a lot of first downs, though, and keeping the chains moving, but we're just not seeing the big chunk yardage plays that we've seen from him in years past. Passing game is also going to have some question marks as well. Stephon Diggs really faded after a hot start last year, but it wasn't all his fault considering the quality of the targets that he was getting from Allen. Now he's gone, and that's a massive presence in the offense to replace. And quite frankly, nobody in that wide receiver room scares me. Coleman has size and decent hands, but he's raw. Curtis Samuel just does not strike me as the wide receiver 1 type. And Khalil Shakir has a grand total of 65 career targets. It really works primarily down the field, which is appropriate for who he is. Kincaid does look like a really great piece, though, at tight end, credit where it's due. I think there's going to be some regression with Allen this season, especially in the passing game. And I wouldn't be shocked if people drafting him as the number one overall quarterback end up disappointed at the end of the season. I still think he ends up somewhere in the top 5 or 6 at the position just because of his rushing upside. But his run atop the position, I think, is over, at least for this season.
Nice. Okay. So no top 2 finish for him. There's always going to be somebody in a draft here, and that's going to grab him. They love him. Their strategy is different than yours. Everybody has the way they think that it works. He's a fine pick. Where he is, he can be a difference maker and a hog in fantasy. So good luck, everyone, on that.
So widely regarded as the best real life QB in the league, that hasn't necessarily been the case in fantasy with his last QB1 finish coming in 2022. With a couple new speedy options in the offense, will Patrick Mahomes regain his spot at the top of the fantasy QB standings this season?
Yes, he definitely will. I totally, wholeheartedly believe it. Could he be I think he could possibly be a bargain in fantasy drafts this year. I think there's a distinct possibility that enough fantasy managers might be scared off by last year's performance, even though he finished as QB8 in fantasy last year, but he did pass for 1,000 less yards and 14 fewer touchdowns than the previous year. Yet he posted a career high completion rate, 67.2, while also setting career highs in both rushing attempts and rushing yards, because he had nobody to throw to, so he had to run a lot more, right? At least in the beginning to middle of the season. So now, a finish like that is hardly horrendous, right? But not with the pick that you spent him on in one league, myself included. It was his first season, averaging less than 20 fantasy points per game. He averaged 261 passing yards per game last season. That was the fewest in his 6 seasons with the Chiefs, but still 6th in passing yards in the league with over 4,100. He had a career low in yards per attempt and touchdown rate, career low ADOT, kind of makes sense too. He ranked last among all qualified quarterbacks. I'm here to tell you that's not happening again. Okay. He simply just did not have enough pass catching firepower. Okay. He will be a top 5 QB this season because the Chiefs, they restocked the cupboard, right? So the clear number 1 there, Rashee Rice, second year in the offense this year. He was the only wide receiver to surpass 500 yards last year. I know there's that looming suspension there, but still, he's not going to. He should probably only miss 6 or 8 games at the most, so he won't be gone the entire season. They brought in Marquise Hollywood Brown on a 1-year deal. He has seen over 100 targets in each of his last 4 seasons. And they drafted Xavier Worthy, first rounder out of Texas. He had the 3rd most receiving yards in FBS since 2021. Both Brown and Worthy offer, as Matt mentioned at the top, impressive speed, and they can stretch defenses. That should allow Mahomes to be able to connect for splash plays, find those wide open options closer to the line, and allow his receivers to get some yak and do what they do. That career low ADOT he had last season, that's not happening again in 2024. It's just not. And, let's not forget Mahomes' favorite target, tight end Travis Kelce. He's been a top 3 tight end in fantasy every year since 2016. Sure, he's 34, but with their chemistry, I mean, it still probably isn't the best wide receiver room in the league, but they've certainly upgraded over last season's wide receiver group. I think Mahomes will be a top 3 pick in Superflex and 2 QB leagues, and among the first few quarterbacks off the board between the 20 and 35th pick in 1 QB formats. I am curious to see, maybe Matt, you got an opinion on this. Once drafts are in full swing, if you start seeing Mahomes going more often before Allen and Jalen Hurts, my thought is fantasy managers, they might be scared of Allen's lack of pass catchers that you mentioned, and Saquon being with the Eagles, taking more of the rushing attack away from Hurts. God, I can't wait for draft season. So I wonder about that, but Mahomes is a great option. At the end of the day, he ranks first in career fantasy points per game in NFL history. He still had a top 5 PFF passing grade last year. I'm happy to buy any sort of dip on Mahomes. I know Matt probably would too. I'd fade him at your own peril.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a huge bounce back season for him with that restocked cupboard. And we know Andy Reid loves to throw the ball all over the place, especially when you've got an elite talent like Mahomes is.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we're headed down to Texas. This Cowboys quarter pounder, had perhaps his finest season last year, finishing as QB3. Can Dak Prescott beat his ADP again this season in fantasy?
I think he absolutely can, just considering where he's being drafted. Um, he was a QB3 in overall points with 351 and fifth in points per game at 20.7. He had 7 of those games within 5 points of that average, 4 games well below. And it was really at the beginning of the season where he struggled. 3 of his first 5 games of the season, and 3 of those games were below 10 points. And he had 6 games well above. And he does get knocked for his consistency and tendency to really look bad a few games per season, but that you also see that reflected in his ADP. Dak Prescott, every now and then, a couple times a year, is going to go out there and lay an egg. That's just who he is. Speaking of his ADP, right now he's the 9th QB off the board in NFFC drafts with an ADP around 75. I definitely think he can outperform that, though. He led the NFL in completions last year with 410. He was first in passing touchdowns with 36, third in yards at over 4,500, fifth in yards per attempt at 7.6, and second in air yards with over 2,750. And that pass offense worked all over the field. He was third in passes over 10 yards, fourth in passes over 20 yards, and fourth in passes over 30 yards down the field. And he was very consistent, like over the course of his career, right? If he plays 16 or 17 games, you can count on 4,000 yards passing and close to 35 touchdowns. And I'll happily take that. And the team really started to sling the ball around the field a lot more after the bye. Before that bye, he averaged 31 attempts, 222 yards, and 1 touchdown per game. Afterwards, 36 attempts, 289 yards, and 2.7 touchdowns per game. He's likely to have a pedestrian running game behind him again this season with a backfield led by old-ass Zeke Elliott and Rico Dowdle. Deuce Vaughn might have a small role as well, no pun intended. He will have rookie first-round pick Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma watching his blind side. Dude's got a ton of potential, but he's going to take a minute to develop. And that wide receiver room is mostly unchanged from last season. As we all know, CeeDee Lamb is an absolute monster. Jalen Tolbert, though, is a big question mark. He's coming into his 3rd season, and the prevailing wisdom in years past used to be that, you would look for a breakout from a receiver in their 3rd year. I don't know if we're going to see it from him, though. I'm not sold on him. Brandon Cooks is going to be 31 in September, and he's been reliant on his speed throughout his career. Eventually, dude is going to lose a step or two. However, he did have the 2nd highest average depth of target of his career last season at 13.2 yards. So, what the hell do I know? Where he's going in drafts, you can expect quite similar production to the other QBs that are around him, even if all of them arrive at those totals much differently. Overall, 9th QB off the board, you're really not putting a whole lot of skin in the game to take him. And he's shown you that he can be a top 3 option at the position over the course of a season. And he can be the number 1 quarterback for stretches as well. I think he's a pretty damn good value there.
For sure. I mean, he's like the question we had before about waiting. He is one of the best reasons not to draft a quarterback early because, as I mentioned, he can give you 90% of the top players' production 4 or 5 rounds later. So, excellent. Okay.
So the Texans were jumping for joy when they saw what their rookie QB could do, and maybe a little bit because they saw what Bryce Young did. CJ Stroud led the Texans to the playoffs with one of the best rookie QB seasons ever. Can he lead your fantasy team to the playoffs this season?
Well, I'm certainly hoping so because I have him in our big keeper contract league. So I'm certainly hoping so. ADP of 51. He's the reigning rookie offensive player of the year last year. Finished QB 11 in fantasy. Over 4,100 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, just 5 picks. You love that. Stroud was, looking back, a little more boom and bust than people probably realized last year. He had 7 weeks where he failed to reach 20 fantasy points and 2 weeks where he failed to reach even 10. But those 5 picks, his ability to limit turnovers was a huge, huge part of his success. In fantasy football, turnovers are detrimental. Some of his marks last year: 3rd in yards per attempt, 6th in passer rating, 1st in interception percentage at 1%, 1st in yards per game, 1st in ADOT. And although it was somewhat surprising to see that some of his advanced metrics fell outside of the league's top 10 QBs, Stroud ranked among 32 QBs with 300 or more dropbacks. He was EPA per dropback, number 13, completion percentage over expected, number 19, and a PFF pass grade of 79.4. That put him 14th in the league. But so Stefon Diggs' arrival, with Stroud's performance last year and the arrival of Stefon Diggs, we have him as, this ADP is a QB5. So is there room for him to get there? I got to say, it's going to be tough. I think Stroud and company will need to exceed their already high expectations already. Stroud's not much of a rusher, just averages about 11 yards per game on the ground, which definitely caps his ceiling. So Stroud would need to improve his passing yardage by several hundred. So he'd need to be near 5,000 total yards and or increase his touchdown total from 23 into the 30 range to return value at that ADP. But he appears to be such a great quarterback. He could still be that and still come up short of his ADP. So maybe don't let that bother you. He got sacked a fair amount last year, went down 38 times. That was the 8th most in the league. Texans O-line had a 19th, was the pass blocking grade, 19th overall in the league out of, pretty much in the middle. But they did upgrade at O-line big time in the draft and in free agency. So his PFF pass grade when he was under pressure was horrible. He was ranked 17th, but when it was clean, man, 7th in the league. His adjusted completion percentage tanked under pressure as well. So I don't really want to underestimate the potential for what now is probably one of the best wide receiver rooms in the NFL. Stefon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell will be here at some point as well. Tight end Dalton Schultz as well. Joe Mixon is in town now. They had the league's worst rush offense in terms of yards per carry in Houston last year. So I think he's going to improve that great, taking some pressure off of CJ Stroud. And again, with his proficiency as a passer still makes him a coveted fantasy asset. I realize there are QBs far cheaper than Stroud who can produce similar results in 24, but I think it's worth taking a shot. Heck yeah. Anything in the chat? Are you on mute? Yep, you probably are. All right. So previously, few fantasy football owners wanted anything to do with this Lions player as their QB1. And then he went from mediocre, mid-tier QB to an elite fantasy points producer and made them eat crow. With arguably the best roster of weapons in the NFL, can Jared Goff finish as QB1 again?
I think he can be a QB1, but
Yes,
there ain't no way in hell he's going to be the QB1.
No, a QB1. Sorry.
Last year he was a number 7 overall QB at 303 points, just 15th though in points per game at 17.8. But keep in mind he was behind 5 dudes who played a half season or less in that regard. He had 11 games within 5 points of his average, a couple games below, including 1 game under 10 points, and he had 4 games that were well over. Last year, he had a career best 67.3% completion percentage, threw for over 4,500 yards, almost 4,600, 30 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. Dude isn't a threat to run at all, though. He has less than 100 total yards rushing combined over the past couple seasons. And his yardage mark was the second best in the NFL, touchdowns fourth most, and he led the league with 227 passing first downs. That Lions team knew how to grind things out and just keep the chains moving. He was second in the NFL in passes traveling more than 10 yards and 20 yards, and top 10 in passes over 40 yards. So they weren't just dinking and dunking down the field. And the big knock on him are his home road splits, and they're true, right? He had
Sure.
8 fewer touchdowns on the road than at home last season, despite playing one more game and having 49 more attempts on the road. And his picks were evenly split at 6 and 6. And I think part of it too is he's somebody that just performs much, much better indoors as well. We can't really discount that fact. But dude is an absolutely perfect fit in Ben Johnson's offense with an outstanding supporting cast of Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta, a hopefully emerging Jameson Williams, one of the best offensive lines in the game, and an awesome backfield duo of Monty and Gibbs. Right now, he's being drafted as a 12th QB off the board, just outside the top 100 with an ADP of 101. He likely doesn't have that huge week upside that you see with some of the guys that are being drafted before him, but he's very steady, very consistent. Word around fantasy football circles is if you draft him, have somebody else on your roster to sub in for road games. And I can see some merit to that. But at the same time, it's really only in the tougher matchups. If, they're in Green Bay or Chicago in late December, sure. But if they're, like last season in Tampa Bay, he had a hell of a game there, right?
He did.
Threw for over 300 yards. So he's shown he can get it done.
Had a great first half in the NFC Championship game.
Why you got to bring that shit up again, man?
No.
If I'm taking him, all right, 12th QB off the board, I'm somebody who waits on quarterback. And if I wait on quarterback, I'm probably going to take a couple of them anyway. He's maybe that tier below of set it and forget it guys, but he's a damn solid option at the position.
Absolutely. Heck yeah.
So if this second year quarterback can stay healthy, he's got legit top 5 upside. He's got a trio of good young receivers, including second round pick AD Mitchell to work with coming into the year. Is Anthony Richardson worth a top 5 pick at the position though?
It's tough. That injury risk definitely scares people off, myself included. But God, I mean, running quarterbacks just freaking rule, fantasy. So his ADP is 59. He played in just 4 games before getting hurt, missing the rest of the season. So I want to talk about fantasy points per drop back. I think that's one of the best metrics at predicting a QB's fantasy points per game, in the future, the following season, at least. His last year was 0.76 per drop back. It was the best by any QB in the past 3 years, better than career years of Jalen Hurts, better than career years of Josh Allen. Not since Lamar's 2019 whopper of a season have we seen such efficiency. He also matched CJ Stroud in weekly top 5 finishes, despite missing most of the season. His incredible ability there, the rushing. So it's the best fantasy cheat code there is. 48% of his fantasy production came from running. Last year's full season pace would have led all quarterbacks in rush yards, rush touchdowns, attempts, design runs. It's just amazing what he could have done if he had stayed healthy. So as I mentioned, they all carry extra health risk. I think Richardson's maybe kind of baked into his ADP. That's 2 to 3 rounds after QBs with lower ceilings. So we'll see. He's got a great coach there in Steichen, a nice QB guru, Coach Justin Herbert, Coach Jalen Hurts. I think he's going to be able to help Richardson develop into more of a processor, which will then make him more of not just one-dimensional, more of a passer as well. He's expected to be fully recovered and ready for camp. He bulked up to 255 pounds, adding some serious muscle in the offseason. He's now about 30 pounds heavier than the average weight of an NFL quarterback. So let's hope that aids him in staying on the field and off the injury report, with that outstanding rushing ability, that right coaching staff around him. I think the fantasy potential for him is really unmatched. It really outweighs his health risk. I think it's definitely someone you should target.
And if you are going to target him, make sure you've got a damn steady backup. If I'm taking him,
Sure.
maybe I take Baker Mayfield or somebody like that later on.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Next guy we got down in Jacksonville. So this quarterback is just missing one ingredient to make him a more appealing fantasy quarterback, and it's consistency. Matt, will he finally, will Trevor Lawrence finally get it this season?
Well, that is the $65,000 question, and apparently we're just going to talk about every single damn AFC South quarterback
Yes.
here on this preview.
Didn't notice that till now.
He was QB 13 in total points last year with 276. He was 17th in points per game at 17.3. He had 10 games within that average, or within 5 points of that average, 3 games well below, and including a couple of them under 10 points. And he had 3 games that went well above that average, including a 32-point effort in week 11. Considering what this dude was expected to be coming into the league, he's definitely not lived up to the hype. Last year, he completed a little over 65.5% of his passes for 4,016 yards, 21 touchdowns, 14 interceptions. He will run a little as well, adding 339 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground. But, not dissimilar to Josh Allen, turnovers are a problem for him. He threw multiple touchdowns in just 6 of his 16 starts. And he really struggled towards the end of the season as well, completing less than 61% of his passes in 5 of his last 8 games. There's been some big changes to that wide receiver room. Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram are the main holdovers from last season. And yes, I know Ingram is a tight end, but they're joined by Gabe Davis, who was signed in free agency from Buffalo and quite frankly, just doesn't move the needle for me. I think he's a great play for best ball, but not for season-long leagues. He'll have his couple blow-up games and then go 3 for 40 the rest of the time. They also added first-round pick Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU, who should immediately take over the down-the-field targets. And though I've never really been a big proponent of his, the loss of Calvin Ridley could really hurt considering how often he was targeted in the end zone and in the red zone. I like Lawrence better as a QB2 and super flex in 2 QB leagues, or paired with a higher variance upside QB in single QB leagues. Think somebody like Anthony Richardson.
Sure.
Right now, he's the 16th quarterback off the board with an ADP of 116. I think that's about right for him.
Yeah. It's I'm a little more higher on Brian Thomas Jr. If you caught our rookie video, that was probably a couple months ago now, but I'm looking for some decent things out of him this year.
Yeah, me too, man. This QB led the NFL in passing yards last season, but many still have questions about him despite being at the controls of arguably the most explosive offense in the league. Kyle, where do you stand on Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa?
I still like him just because of, man, that offense there and in fantasy could really be a season winner for you. Last year, he's got an ADP of 106. Last year, he pushed those concussion injury concerns aside, played all 17 games, set career highs across the board in attempts, completion rate at over 69%, pretty good. Pass yards and touchdowns as well. He finished his QB9 last season, but was, really still not consistent enough. He has shown, the flashes in upside, but not, never really for a full season yet. So, for example, last year he was QB4 through the first 8 weeks of the season, and then QB10 through week 13. And so he's had 29 healthy games that he has played during the Mike McDaniel era. He's posted just 7 top 5 QB weeks and 14 weeks outside the top 15. So, buyer beware. He just always seems to vanish, during playoff time, fantasy playoff time, and it just really fucking hurts. So a couple of things I do like about him. Gets the ball out real quickly. He was the quickest among all qualifiers last year, 2.26 second average. I think that's definitely part of the Mike McDaniel's effect per se. He took a sack on only 4.9 of his dropbacks, 4th best rate behind some pretty good guys, Goff, Mahomes, and Josh Allen. So you talked about McDaniel. He's pretty innovative. You got Tyreek back, Waddle back. My only concern, I guess, would be the offensive line. They ranked 31st in pass block win rate last season. They lost a damn good center in Robert Hunt. And Teron Armstead's 34 years old and is a very, red flag, high injury risk. So, hopefully that they fix that up a little bit and they can mesh. He's a QB2. I think he could probably be worthy of a pick as early as round 9 if you're so inclined. I'm just going to treat him as a fantasy spot starter given the right matchup.
We got Dubo in the chat, makes the point the weapons around Tua are more enticing than Tua himself. That makes absolute sense. And it also makes sense that he gets rid of the ball so quickly with as much motion that team uses. If I can get Tyreek Hill the ball when he's at a dead sprint and the defense is flat footed, hell yeah, it's only going to take me a second to get rid of the damn thing.
Yep. Excellent. Sorry, man. Okay, we got few more here. 4 more left. So we're headed to LA, specifically the Charger. This QB there enters the fantasy season with, a new head coach with a new strategy and questions surrounding the receiving core. How do you see Justin Herbert's fantasy value this season, Matt?
He is one of the more, at least for me, difficult guys to kind of prognosticate. Last year, he got hurt in week 14 and didn't play again. He finished as the QB 17 overall with 240 points. He was QB 11, though, in points per game with 18.5. He had just 4 games within 5 points of his average, 4 games well below, including 3 under 10 points, one of which was the game he got hurt, and 5 games well above. So he was pretty boomer bust last year. He had a 65.1% completion rate, which was a career low, just a little over 3,100 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 7 picks. He did chip in a couple hundred yards on the ground and 3 more TDs, but that was nowhere near what we were expecting based on how he performed over the first couple seasons of his career. And quite frankly, those numbers were the worst of his young career. And it really speaks to the state that offense was in. That whole team was in disarray. It was a dumpster fire. They brought in Kellen Moore to run the offense, and that shit just did not work. Now you've got new head coach Jim Harbaugh, and he brought Greg Roman over with him, and they definitely like to run the ball, but they've also never had a quarterback as talented as Justin Herbert at the controls. Still, you're likely not going to see many games of him attempting 40 or more passes, but he should see 30 regularly, and you never know. We don't know how good this team is going to be, so there may be some garbage time in there as well. That wide receiver room is looking much different with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams gone. Quentin Johnston has been a bust so far, and there's rumblings he's not even going to be on the field, and 3 wide receiver sets in favor of new addition DJ Chark. Josh Palmer is the lone holdover of consequence, and he's shown good chemistry with Herbert in the past, and the team also spent a second-round pick on Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. Right now, dude, 17th QB off the board with an ADP of 120. I think he ends up being a high-end QB2, somewhere in that 13 to 15 range, with QB1 upside several times this season.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned that was probably Herbert's probably the most gifted quarterback that Roman or Harbaugh's coached. Roman was the OC or an associate head coach in Stanford. So Andrew Luck would like a word
from his couch.
That's true. That is true.
All right. To say this Browns quarterback has had a tumultuous couple of years would be an understatement. Even when he was on the field, he's not really looked like his old self. Should Deshaun Watson have a place on our teams this season?
Ooh, I don't know. That's a tough call there. I'm got mixed feelings on it. So he should return in time for training camp after suffering that season-ending shoulder injury last year. He appeared in just 6 games, though he did score at least 22.6 fantasy points in 3 of them. Can you trust him? well, if you're a woman, you shouldn't trust him. But Fantasyland, I'm not so sure. Right, his team went 5-1 in the games he started, but I think he owes that more to the Browns defense than anything that he did. And if he can't stay healthy, that's a problem. Hurt week 3, he missed weeks 4 and 5, came back week 7, got hurt again, returned a couple weeks later in week 9, and then the final straw was week 10 when he was finally out for the year. That's a problem. He's got to stay on the field. His completion percentage last year was in the cellar. It was garbage. It was at 61.8% among quarterbacks with at least 150 dropbacks. His completion percentage was 9th worst in the league. Kenny frickin' Pickett had a better completion percentage than Watson. Okay, so that just tells you how bad it was. He doesn't need to be anywhere near 70, which is where he was in 2020 when he went off. But if he can get much closer to his career average, 66, right around there, it's a must if he intends to play over his current draft value. He had a bad PFF grade last year of just 66.2. He ranked 26th out of 45 quarterbacks with 150 dropbacks. Other ranks among that group included 37th in completion rate, 32nd in adjusted completion percentage, 41st in completion rate over expected, and 30th in yards per attempt, while also setting career lows in rushing attempts and rushing yards per game. Now, he can still be a decent rusher. He had at least 22 rushing yards in 4 out of the 6 games he played last year. The good news for Watson is the Browns added Jerry Jeudy this offseason. Now, it's, understandable if you're not a fan of Jeudy or find him an exciting player, but I believe he's an upgrade over what Elijah Moore has delivered there in Cleveland the past 2 years. I see a connection there. He's an excellent route runner. Paired with Amari Cooper, that could be a nice 1-2. Ken Dorsey is the new OC there. You may remember him. He was with the Bills for the last 5 years, and then the OC there for the last couple of years. Got fired mid-season. Maybe somewhat unfairly too, because I think the Bills just had a huge turnover problem. But anyway, Ken Dorsey's offense leans more pass heavy. In his 2 years as OC for the Bills, he ranked 4th in neutral situation pass rate. The Browns of the past 2 seasons ranked 19th in neutral situation pass rate. So with the addition of Jeudy and the fact that your all-pro caliber fantasy hog running back Nick Chubb is coming off a major knee injury, it's not hard to envision the Browns leaning a bit more pass this year. I think an increase in passing volume would obviously give Watson more opportunities to compile some numbers, some stats, even if the efficiency doesn't rebound, a ton significantly. So I think the way he does rebounds and shows that it's just by proving that he can still play, right? He really hasn't even looked good for any meaningful stretch yet with the Browns. So the supporting talent there, I like Jeudy, Amari Cooper, even Elijah Moore, David Njoku, the tight end, and a solid backfield. It looks plenty strong enough for them to do something and him to look good in fantasy. But, we'll see. He still has the potential to be one of the best fantasy quarterbacks, but no one is going to draft him as a number 1 option. So he could be a cheap investment. With a late round pick there in 1 QB formats, we'll see. He should be considered high end number 2 worth drafting with a late round pick in all QB1 leagues, and in Superflex and 2 QB leagues, he's probably worth a mid round selection.
Very good.
I love this guy. Tough as nails. This 36-year-old Rams QB might have his last shot being a quality fantasy option this season. He has one of the best play callers in the league at head coach and talented weapons all around him. What can Matt Stafford give fantasy managers this season?
Well, that's a very good question. He is getting up there in years, right? He missed weeks 9 and week 18 last season. Overall, he was a QB 15 in overall points, and he was a QB 18 at 17 points per game. He was very, very consistent, though. He had 11 games within that 17 point per game average. Just one of them, well below, and 3 pretty far above. So, again, very, very consistent. However, he didn't really show the massive upside last season as he had no games over 30 points. His 62.6% completion rate was his lowest since the 2014 season. He just missed 4,000 yards passing with 39.65. And had he not missed those games, I imagine he'd have been somewhere around 4,500. His 24 touchdown passes were the fewest in a season where he started 15 or more games since 2018. And he had 11 picks, which isn't terrible.
No.
He threw multiple touchdown passes in 5 of his last 6 games after doing it just once in the team's first 8 games. And, let's be real here. We're starting to see some age-related decline from him. Again, it's going to be his age 36 season, and the dude has taken an absolute beating over his career, but he's not been a punk about it. On a pound-for-pound basis, he's one of the toughest players in the game. But we do need to be cognizant of the fact that he's just one hit away from being in a world of hurt and possibly done. And I understand you can say that about any quarterback, but just kind of given his injury history, it's something we need to keep on our mind. Sean McVay remains at the helm of the team, and we know he's going to be calling the plays. New offensive coordinator Mike LaFleur joins the team, having spent the past couple seasons as a Jets offensive coordinator, and he got some pretty damn good results there in 2022. Stafford has a pair of good to great receivers in Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Kupp is getting on in years. This is going to be his age 31 season. And with the injuries he's dealt with over the past couple of years, it is fair to wonder what he has left in the tank. Puka exploded on the scene as a rookie last season with an incredible 160 targets, but he also saw his largest target shares come early in the season when Cooper Kupp was out, including a ridiculous 20 targets against the 49ers in week 2. Those two are joined by newcomers DeMarcus Robinson, who was signed as a free agent from the Ravens, and 6th-round rookie Jordan Whittington, a big slot out of Texas. His run support is going to be led by Kyron Williams, who has yet to demonstrate he can stay healthy for a full season. And the team did spend a 3rd-round pick on Blake Corum out of Michigan. Right now, he's the 19th QB off the board with an ADP of around 135. He's a low to mid QB2 that may pop for a QB1 game a couple times this season. But other than that, we need to keep our expectations in line with reality. He's very appropriately priced right now at QB 19 and, likely finishes somewhere between there and the QB 15. Maybe QB 14, but that's about it. There's not a whole lot of upside left there with him.
Agreed.
So before we jump on to our last guy, we had Dubo in the chat just requesting our thoughts on the QBs that they've got up there in Minnesota. You got Sam Darnold, who, quite frankly, I don't think he's as bad as he looked when he was with the Jets. I think he can be serviceable, and I think he can be better than anything that the Vikings ran out there last season. Once Kirk Cousins got hurt, I realized Josh Dobbs had that little run where everybody thought he was just the shit, but you get rid of the in that sentence, and that's more of what he is.
I think his run was more Arizona than Minnesota, but I think he had one decent game in Minnesota. But yeah.
And everyone else who was at Jaron Hall, who was just, nothing to speak of, got hurt. JJ McCarthy, the rookie out of Michigan, he's raw. There's a lot of talent there. He's got a decent amount of experience at the college level, 2 full years on an elite team. He went to the college football playoff both seasons, so he's no stranger to high pressure environments like that, including capping off last season with a national championship. He's not going to be ready to start week 1. I think he's somebody, and forgive me, I don't know the Vikings bye week offhand, but I would not be surprised if you see Darnold out there for the first 5 or 6 games this season to give McCarthy a little bit more time to get ready. Once he does get out there, I imagine Kevin O'Connell is going to run a fairly conservative offense for him, and they're going to need to hope that Aaron Jones can stay healthy and Ty Chandler can stay healthy and give them the support and take some pressure off of McCarthy, because he's not going to run out there and just start slinging it from day one.
Yeah. They got an early bye week. They're number 6. They're week 6. So
Okay, so I could see, him coming in after the bye there in week 7, just depending
versus
on how the
versus
things
our
are going.
Lions.
Awesome.
That would be great, wouldn't it? But
Hmm.
let's not forget Kevin O'Connell's a pretty damn good coach. What he did with that carousel of quarterbacks last year, they were still winning some games. So I think JJ McCarthy and him are going to click well, and that's going to work out. I think JJ McCarthy is going to be huge for fantasy next season. The season, we'll see what he can do, but I'm excited about it.
Now, if you will, imagine you threw 4 touchdowns in your first NFL start. That'd feel awesome, wouldn't it?
Awesome.
Now imagine you threw 4 touchdowns total over your next 7 games. That's Will Levis. Is he going to be taking a step forward this season?
Yeah, I think that he will. I don't know how big of a step forward, but he's the true, he's the last QB2 quarterback. He's the 24th quarterback off the board, an ADP of 168. He finished a QB 33 last year in fantasy. He only had 1 top 12 finish, and he had 3 QB 25 or worse finishes. So he didn't start until week 7, until Ryan Tannehill got hurt. He played in 9 games, passed for just over 1,800 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 4 picks. His per game averages were pretty mediocre. Completion rate was garbage at 58%. He averaged 200.9 yards a game, sub 1 touchdowns, and 0.44 interceptions, and just 7 adjusted yards per pass attempt. Among 45 QBs with 135 dropbacks or more, Levis ranked 32nd in PFF's passing grade, 6th in big time throw percentage, 6th in turnover worthy play percentage, and 24th in time to throw, 42nd in completion percentage above expectation. So it was not very good. Now, was this all Levis's fault? No, I don't think so. He played behind a very, very poor O-line. They ranked 25th in PFF's pass blocking grades. His only receiver of note last year was DeAndre Hopkins towards the end of his career. And then, he keyed on him so much, it just didn't really work every week. Everybody knew where he was going. And, they made a change at head coach. I'm actually a Mike Vrabel lover, not a hater, but maybe there was some other things possibly going in the background that weren't working that we just don't know about. So the Tennessee Titans did invest in the offense around Levis in the offseason, adding wide receiver Calvin Ridley. Tony Pollard is there now. And they also drafted a hell of a offensive lineman, tackle actually, J.C. Latham in the first round. I think the offense will be more pass-oriented than last season. Derrick Henry's out. Brian Callahan's the new head coach there. He has a pretty good track record with QBs. So I think Levis has a chance to at least be an upside QB2 this year. We'll see. He's also probably going to, encounter rough patches, definitely in his first full season as starter. But, a dramatically upgraded cast there around him gives him a fighting chance to be a pleasant fantasy surprise this year.
Very good. Nowhere to go but up in many regards, right?
Yep. Heck yeah. All right. That's all we got, folks. Make sure you guys like and subscribe if you like our content. We would really appreciate it. Let you know too, we also do fantasy baseball. You can find us at Stone Down Sports Fantasy Baseball, our YouTube channel. We're on there every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So check that out as well. In fact, I'll drop the link.
I already did it.
Oh, Matt put it in there. What a hell of a guy. So yeah, links are all in the description. Have a great evening, everyone. Stay stoned.
See you, folks.